Welcome back, everyone, to a special new top 20 list. This time I thought I'd do a 2024 edition, updated version of my top 20 favorite PS1 games of all time. With that said, the music in the background today is from Final Fantasy VIII. So enjoy the music. Specifically used at a castle where you end up fighting the Tomberry King. With that said, coming in first at number 20, Loose. So I have it in these paper cases. First up at number 20 of my favorite PS1 games is Vigilante 8. Arguably the best series of two games, vehicular combat games that were never, or rather outside of Twisted Metal. It's a superb great game with many interesting unlockables. And if you've never played Vigilante, I do highly recommend. You can also play it on the N64, but I recommend the PS1 version specifically for better audio quality and overall performance. With that said, coming in next at 19 is another vehicular combat game, arguably my favorite of the era. Coming in at 19 is Twisted Metal 2, which is arguably, in my opinion, the best of the Twisted Metal series, and at least the best for a long time there, up until Twisted Metal Black for the PS2. Easily that and this are the two best of the Twisted Metal series as a whole. But this has an iconic cover art and everything. It's just a blast to play, especially the final boss though in this game is crazy and insane. I do recommend more people play the classic Twisted Metal games if you've never had the chance. I just wish vehicular combat games would become more popular again. Coming in next at number 18. Arguably one of the coolest and most fun sort of copies off of Tetris of all time in my opinion. That is the Capcom classic Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, which is a lot of fun, and the fact it also includes characters from Vampire, aka Darkstalkers, as well. Not just Street Fighter characters. As you see, Morrigan, Donovan, and I forget how to correctly pronounce her name, because I don't believe in butchering names. Of course, then you see Ken and Chun-Yi right there. Just an all-time classic, great fun game if you never had a chance to try out Super Puzzle Fighter 2. Next, coming in at number 17 is the original classic first of the Silent Hill series, which remains an all-time survival horror classic to this very day in my opinion. It's a great introduction, though Silent Hill 2 would far surpass Silent Hill 1. But Silent Hill 1 would actually end up having a solid, great sequel. Probably one of the best horror game sequels of all time. Silent Hill 3. And if you've never played Silent Hill 1, I do highly recommend checking it out, as it is good and creepy. Just be ready for the really bad tank controls. Though I think it really helps the classic horror games. Next, coming in at number 16, we have Die Striga, which is one of my all-time favorite fighting games. Especially of earlier 3D fighters, this game was really ahead of its time. With the mobility and everything you had to it is great and superb. And the great thing is, of course, it supported analog controls and everything, though it was released in 1998 at the later end of the PS1's lifespan. Doesn't change the fact this game really was ahead of its time in many ways. And the fact it also even had a story mode in it, even if it's not great, especially not the audio quality, but still, it really was ahead of its time in many aspects. Whether it be game mechanics, or the fact it actually had like a 3-hour story mode is kind of crazy. Done by Koei, or Koei Tecmo. Next, coming in at 15 is going to be a very divisive opinion, I know. For me, coming in at 15 is Final Fantasy VII. As I've said before, Final Fantasy VII is not my favorite Final Fantasy, definitely not even my favorite PS1 Final Fantasy. For me, out of the mainline games that were released on here, Final Fantasy VII, at least of the PS1 era exclusives, it is arguably my least favorite. Though it still is in my top 20 favorite PS1 games, keep in mind. With that said, still good overall, just compared to the others on the platform, I just fear 7 is lacking a little. Though it's still a great RPG. But it was not my first Final Fantasy game, keep in mind. Speaking of coming in at number 14, one of the most underrated and awesome fighting games of the PS1 era from Capcom. A superb, great game. If you've never had really the ability to try out Rival Schools and you ever get the opportunity, I do highly recommend trying Rival Schools out, as it is a really fun blast game to play. It's just a lot of fun, and the crazy attacks and everything. And also, it's awesome that Sakura, or rather, yeah, is in the game also really helps. Next, coming in at 13, loose unfortunately, Mega Man Legends 1, which I still, to this day, I still prefer Legends 1 over Legends 2. Just overall, I liked certain elements better. But with that said, still, Legends 2 is very much still one of my favorite Mega Man games, and still one of the, I think, best RPGs on the console. But with that said, still, next up, we are dropping down to number 12. And that goes to Crash Bandicoot 2. Cortex Strikes Back. Obviously my favorite Crash game of all time. And for me, I just couldn't get as much into Crash 1 as some people out there. Crash 3 is a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but there's just some I love about the stages, and specifically the music in this game. It's arguably, for me, the best Crash game of all time, and that has never changed, in my opinion. Coming in next at 12, or coming in at number 11, of course needs no real introduction, Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is arguably my second favorite of the Final Fantasy specifically exclusive PS1 mainline games. Like I said, yeah, for me, Final Fantasy IX is definitely better than Final Fantasy VII. Some people may agree and some people may disagree. That's all well and good. I didn't really get into Final Fantasy IX until later. For a time there, 7 was my second favorite, but once I actually got in and tried Final Fantasy IX, I will admit, 9 really did capture me, and the music is superb and great. For me, it is in my top probably 3 favorite Final Fantasy game soundtracks of all time. But still, yeah, comes to 11 and very deserving, just shy of the top 10. Speaking of, coming in at top 10, first at 10, needs no real introduction. Of course, one of the greatest fighting games, definitely, of the 5th console generation. That being, of course, Tekken 3. Which really needs no true introduction. Also, best version of Yoshimitsu of all time of designs. This, and I feel later on, like Soul Calibur 6 is another one of his best designs. But this would be the introduction, of course, Jin Kazama, as well as Xiao Yu, and of course, Ogre, True Ogre, as well as Brian Fury, and a few other characters, and also probably my favorite version of Jax with Gunjack. And of course, Gun, which is a blast and Tekken Ball mode. and Tekken Force. There's just a lot to love about Tekken 3, which is why it easily comes in at number 10. Coming in at number 9, I don't think needs a true introduction, at least if you're a longtime fan of classic JRPGs. For me, my ninth favorite PS1 game of all time goes to Lunar, the Silver Star Story. And if you've never played Lunar, Silver Star Story, give it a shot. It is a blast and a lot of fun to play. The art style is gorgeous, the music is gorgeous. I just highly recommend this game to anyone who's never actually played Lunar. It's a fun. I love the anime cutscenes, and the characters overall are just a lot of fun. And to me, this is the definitive way to play the game. I prefer the voice acting of this version. Coming in at number 8, we go to Square. For, in my opinion, one of the greatest, easily RPGs of that generation for me is Chrono Cross. I know, now, I love Chrono Trigger just as much, of course. I mean, Chrono Trigger's in my top 10 favorite SNES games of all time, but Chrono Trigger is in my top, or rather, Chrono Cross is in my top 10 favorite PS1 era games. I love the music, the characters, the variety of different characters you can play with, like 45 or so different playable characters, so many customization options. And I actually think the combat system is not half bad either, and I actually enjoy it a lot more than quite a few people. For me, Chrono Cross will always remain one of my favorite RPGs of the 5th console generation, easily. But with that said, next up, we have coming in at number 7, Bloody Roar 2, The New Breed. Bloody Roar 2 arguably remains my favorite of the Bloody Roar series, which is great overall, though I also have a special place for Extreme/Primal Fury as well as my second favorite. But Bloody Roar 2, I can't count many times over the years that I played this game, thanks to an long time ago friend got me to try out Bloody Roar because of the unique combat system and everything. And the fact is, the company Hudson Soft that developed the game did an amazing job. I love, and it was cool the fact you had like a secret boss that you had to beat everyone, including the main boss, without losing a fight. One round was fun, but no, if you want to face Shenlong the Tiger, and then you had to beat Shenlong one time, one chance only, to unlock him, which is worth it once you suffer through it, because boy, Shenlong is a nightmare to fight in this game. They nerfed him quite a bit in the future games. But still, and arguably this is my favorite version of Gato the Lion in this game. Plus, I do love the early design of Stun the Insect. Busazima was just flat out OP. Next, coming in at number 6. I don't think needs too much introduction. It's one of the reasons and examples for why there is a subgenre of gaming today called Metroidvanias. And it's mostly thanks to Super Metroid and this game, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. One, in my opinion, still arguably to this day, the best Castlevania game ever made. Nothing else has even come close, though Igarashi has done quite a good job with his Bloodstained series, which is a great spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night, especially Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is a great love letter to us old school fans of Symphony of the Night. And this is a true all-time classic, and there's a reason why people to this day still herald and praise this game. And there's a reason why It is my number 6 favorite PS1 game of all time. And it has not in many years has it ever left my top 10. If anything, it keeps going up a little by little every few years for a good reason. But what's crazy is how much this thing's going for nowadays is absurd. Coming in at number 5. Arguably my favorite early era weapon-based fighting game, though I also love of the same time period Samurai Showdown 4, as well as of course Bushido Blade 1 and 2. But still, Soul Blade, the beginner of that Soul Calibur franchise. All Began Here is a great game. If you've never played Soul Blade, I do highly recommend it. It's a great introduction to the franchise as a whole. Plus, as a big final boss, Cervantes is perfect. He's a big asshole who takes a lot sometimes to beat. He is freaking OP in this game. It's absurd. And then you have to beat Soul Edge, or become later known as Inferno. Coming in at number 4. What do you get when you combine an RPG with survival horror? You get my 4th favorite PS1 game, Parasite Eve, with an actually really fun combat system, in all honesty, plus the fact that it's basically Resident Evil meets Final Fantasy is the best way to put it, in my opinion. And that's what you get with this. I just wish Square would actually revive this series. Because the second one was not bad, don't get me wrong. Not as good as the first, but still not bad. And I have a weird soft spot for Third Birthday on the PSP. Though I wish it would get an HD remaster. With that said, it's time to move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3, of course, in my opinion, the greatest Resident Evil game of all time, still to this day remains my favorite RE game, and I don't see that ever changing. Resident Evil 2 really does hold a special place for me, and it remains one of my top 10 favorite Capcom games of all time. Besides my probably number 2 favorite survival horror game of all time. For many years, this has been duking it out as my number 1 survival horror game. Predominantly, it's been a battle between this and Silent Hill 2 as my favorite. It still remains arguably my favorite horror experience on the PS1, and there's a reason why it is my 3rd favorite PS1 game of all time. Because it's that good. The soundtrack is iconic now. The locations, everything about Resident Evil 2 is awesome. As well as the introduction of the G virus and, of course, William Birkin. There's just a lot of fun and a lot of little hidden stuff when you beat the game under certain circumstances and get special outfits and things. One of the things I love about the old Resident Evil games and old survival horror in general. With that said, getting ready to come to number 2. And I think it's time we change the music up a little. And we're back. Number 2. Arguably my favorite 2D fighting game to this day, and arguably my favorite fighting game on the PS1. And my number 2 game overall on the PS1. Honor goes to, of course, again we go to Capcom, which also holds number 3. And of course, coming in number 2 is Street Fighter Alpha 2. This is the version I've played most of my life. I occasionally played also the Sega Saturn version, which a friend had, though he had the Japanese version, Street Fighter Zero 2. Still doesn't change the fact this game is iconic and superb and amazing. Having nostalgia and everything, and the fact it was the first true game where you could play easily with my favorite character of all time in Street Fighter, and that being Akuma. Also, we would see the introduction of many other future fan favorites like Dan Hibiki as a normal standard character in this game. Of course, also the introduction and playing of Sakura, and as well as many others, as well as Gin, the master, of course, taught Chun-Li. This was just a great era and still remains my favorite of the Alpha series and my favorite overall Street Fighter game, easily. With that said, coming in at number 1 needs no introduction, as the music that's been playing in the background the whole time is from the game. Currently playing Force Your Way Through, the main regular boss theme. Coming at number 1, favorite PS1 game of all time and my favorite video game in general of all time. Coming at number 1, of course, Final Fantasy VIII. Remains my favorite. Mostly, one of the key reasons I actually like the characters. I love Squall. People want to call him emo and stuff. Well, guess what? I hate to tell you, but I think Mr. Cloud is actually more emo than Squall. As time goes on, Squall actually grows as a character and learns to let people in. And I will say, though I'm not always the biggest fan of love stories in video games, I will say I actually think this is probably the best love story, personally, out of all the Final Fantasy games. And I actually like overall the protagonists. I love, like, the first real big main antagonist, Sorceress Ida, and the fact later she ends up coming on your team and you can actually use her and play with her is awesome and everything. Plus, all the GFs in this game, Guardian Forces, are just awesome and some of my favorite summons of all time. Especially, like, Diablos remains pretty much my favorite of all time. The fact in its attack it uses, like, alchemy symbolism and stuff is awesome. But this has come from, keep in mind, somebody who studies theology, so I really appreciate head-ons to different ancient cultures. And keep in mind, I'm also a big fan of steampunk settings, and, well, Final Fantasy VIII is a steampunk after all. With that said, I'll see y'all next time and stay safe. And that is my top 20 favorite, as of right now, favorite PS1 games of all time. With that said, I'll see y'all next time.